Have you ever wondered if the person who hurt you actually knows what they did? What if I told you that the narcissist may secretly carry deep shame about how they treated you, but admitting it would threaten the very identity they've spent their entire life trying to protect? The silence you interpret as confidence may actually be hiding something far more fragile. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why a narcissist can destroy someone emotionally, walk away without an apology, and still be haunted by what happened, just not in the way most people imagine. Once you understand the difference between guilt and shame, their confusing behavior starts making unsettling sense. If you've ever spent nights wondering whether they ever think about you, whether they regret what they did, or whether they even realize the damage they caused, you're not alone. Let me know in the comments, did your narcissist ever apologize sincerely? Or did every apology somehow become your fault? Your experience may help someone else realize they weren't imagining what happened. Many people assume that a narcissist's behavior is driven by an inflated sense of self-worth. But beneath that outward confidence often lies a deep fear of inadequacy. This is where the distinction between shame and guilt becomes essential. Guilt is connected to behavior. A person feels guilty because they recognize they have done something wrong, and that feeling can motivate empathy, accountability, and a sincere desire to repair the damage. Shame, on the other hand, is tied to identity. Instead of thinking, I made a mistake, the internal experience becomes, if people see who I really am, they'll discover I'm fundamentally flawed. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, this feeling can be so overwhelming that avoiding it becomes their primary emotional goal. Rather than processing difficult emotions in a healthy way, they often build a protective identity based on superiority, perfection, or constant admiration. Every compliment reinforces that identity, while every criticism threatens to expose what they fear is hidden underneath. This is why even mild feedback can trigger surprisingly intense reactions. Instead of reflecting on their behavior, they may become defensive, angry, dismissive, or even retaliatory. These responses are not evidence of emotional strength, but attempts to escape the painful experience of shame before it becomes conscious. This pattern also explains why admitting they hurt someone feels far more threatening than it might to most people. Accepting responsibility would require lowering the protective mask they have relied upon for years. In their mind, acknowledging wrongdoing is not simply admitting an error. It feels like confirming their deepest fear that they are unworthy, defective, or fundamentally inadequate. To avoid confronting those painful emotions, they may deny obvious facts, minimize the harm they caused, or shift responsibility onto someone else, preserving the fragile self-image they depend on to feel psychologically safe. One of the most confusing experiences for survivors is watching a narcissist move forward as though nothing happened. They may appear cheerful, successful, and completely unaffected, leading you to believe they have no regrets at all. However, there is an important difference between feeling regret and accepting responsibility. A narcissistic person may regret losing control over the relationship, losing the admiration you once gave them, or facing consequences that damage their reputation. That does not automatically mean they regret the way they treated you. Their emotional focus is often directed toward what they have lost rather than the pain they caused another person. Admitting responsibility presents a much greater challenge because it threatens the carefully crafted identity they work so hard to maintain. If they genuinely accepted that they manipulated, deceived, or emotionally harmed someone, they would have to confront a version of themselves that clashes with the image they want to believe and project to others. Instead of processing this conflict honestly, they often defend against it through denial, rationalization, or rewriting events. They convince themselves that you forced them to behave that way, that you misunderstood their intentions, or that your reactions were the real problem. This is why you may hear statements such as, "You made me act like that," or "Anyone would have reacted the same way." These explanations reduce the emotional discomfort of accountability without requiring genuine self-reflection. They preserve the illusion that they remain the reasonable, misunderstood person, while someone else carries the blame. Even when evidence clearly shows otherwise, protecting that false self-image often feels psychologically safer than acknowledging painful truths. As a result, they may continue defending the story they have created, not because it is accurate, but because it shields them from confronting emotions they find too threatening to face honestly. One of the most frustrating aspects of dealing with a narcissistic person is watching them completely rewrite the history of the relationship. Conversations you clearly remember may suddenly be described in a completely different way. Promises they made are denied. Hurtful comments become jokes that you supposedly misunderstood. Serious patterns of manipulation are dismissed as isolated incidents, or they claim that the very behaviors they displayed were actually yours. This revision of events is not simply about winning an argument. It serves a much deeper psychological purpose by protecting them from confronting their own actions. Accepting an accurate version of the past would require acknowledging choices that conflict with the idealized image they hold of themselves. If they admitted they lied, manipulated, humiliated, or exploited someone, they would have to tolerate the emotional discomfort that comes with responsibility. For someone with strong narcissistic traits, that discomfort can feel overwhelming. Rewriting history becomes a defense against that painful reality. This process often includes selective memory, exaggerating your mistakes, minimizing their own behavior, and presenting themselves as the misunderstood victim. Over time, they may repeat these altered stories so often that they genuinely begin to believe them. That does not necessarily mean every false statement is a deliberate lie. Psychological defenses can become deeply ingrained, allowing distorted memories to feel completely real from their perspective. For the person on the receiving end, this can be incredibly destabilizing. You may begin questioning your memory, wondering whether you overreacted or imagined events. This self-doubt is one of the reasons gaslighting can be so damaging. While you search for the truth, they continue protecting a version of reality that allows them to avoid accountability, maintain their self-image, and escape the shame that honest self-reflection might bring. When a narcissistic person feels emotionally exposed, one of their first reactions is often not reflection, but defense. Instead of pausing to consider your perspective, they may immediately deny what happened, shift the blame onto you, or accuse you of being the actual problem. These reactions can seem intentional and calculated, but they also serve as powerful psychological defenses against feelings they find unbearable. At the center of many of these responses is an attempt to avoid shame. If accepting responsibility threatens their carefully protected self-image, then defending themselves becomes more important than understanding your pain. Blame shifting is one of the most common examples. You might raise a concern about being lied to, ignored, or manipulated, only to hear that you were too demanding, too emotional, or impossible to satisfy. The original issue quickly disappears, replaced by criticism of your behavior. This tactic redirects attention away from their actions and places you in the position of defending yourself instead. Gaslighting often follows a similar pattern. They may insist that events never happened, claim you are remembering things incorrectly, or suggest that your emotions make you unreliable. Over time, these repeated denials can cause you to question your own memory and judgment. The more uncertain you become, the less likely you are to challenge their version of reality. Defensiveness also appears through anger, sarcasm, silent treatment, or dramatic emotional outbursts whenever accountability is mentioned. Rather than engaging in an honest conversation, they create enough confusion or intimidation to end the discussion altogether. These behaviors protect them from confronting uncomfortable truths while leaving you carrying the emotional weight of the conflict. Their refusal to acknowledge your experience is not evidence that your pain was insignificant. It reflects the lengths they will go to avoid facing the shame that genuine accountability would require. Before we go further, if this explanation is helping you make sense of experiences that once felt impossible to understand, take a moment to subscribe and share this video with someone who may still be trapped in self-doubt. Education can be one of the most powerful tools for breaking free from manipulation. For most people, admitting a mistake is uncomfortable but manageable. They may feel embarrassed, apologize, and try to repair the relationship. For a narcissistic person, however, an apology can feel far more threatening because it is experienced as an attack on their identity rather than simply an acknowledgement of poor behavior. Their self-image is often built around being superior, competent, morally right, or beyond criticism. Admitting they intentionally manipulated, deceived, or emotionally harmed someone creates a direct conflict with that carefully maintained identity. This is why even a simple statement such as, "I was wrong," can feel psychologically overwhelming. It requires them to tolerate vulnerability, imperfection, and the possibility that someone else sees them differently than they want to be seen. Instead of viewing accountability as an opportunity for growth, they may experience it as evidence that they are fundamentally flawed. To avoid that painful conclusion, they instinctively defend themselves. Many narcissistic individuals will offer what sounds like an apology, but it often lacks genuine accountability. They might say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," or "I'm sorry, but you pushed me too far." These statements shift the focus away from their behavior and place responsibility back onto the other person. The apology becomes a tool for ending the conversation rather than repairing the damage. Others may avoid apologizing altogether by changing the subject, becoming angry, playing the victim, or insisting that everyone makes mistakes. These responses allow them to escape the emotional discomfort of admitting fault while preserving the image they need to maintain. Until they can separate making a mistake from believing they are completely worthless, sincere accountability will continue to feel like an unacceptable threat to their sense of self, making authentic apologies exceptionally difficult to sustain. When a narcissistic person experiences uncomfortable emotions such as shame, insecurity, or fear of being exposed, they often rely on psychological defense mechanisms rather than processing those feelings directly. 3 of the most common are denial, projection, and image management. These strategies help them avoid confronting painful truths while maintaining the version of themselves they want both others and themselves to believe. Denial allows them to reject reality even when the evidence is clear. They may insist they never said hurtful things, deny making promises they clearly made, or minimize the impact of their behavior by claiming it wasn't a big deal. By refusing to acknowledge the facts, they temporarily protect themselves from the emotional discomfort that accountability would bring. This is why conversations with them can feel circular, as they reject information that threatens their self-image. Projection is another powerful defense. Instead of recognizing their own dishonesty, manipulation, jealousy, or lack of empathy, they accuse someone else of possessing those same qualities. A narcissist who frequently lies may accuse you of being deceitful. Someone who constantly seeks control may insist that you are controlling. This allows them to distance themselves from characteristics they cannot tolerate seeing within themselves while placing you on the defensive. Image management completes the cycle. They often work tirelessly to appear charming, generous, successful, or misunderstood in public, even while behaving very differently in private. They may carefully cultivate admiration, highlight their achievements, or present themselves as the victim whenever conflict arises. Protecting this public image becomes more important than repairing damaged relationships because external validation helps reinforce the fragile identity they depend on. These defenses may preserve their self-esteem in the short term, but they also prevent honest self-reflection, emotional growth, and the development of genuine, mutually respectful relationships built on trust and accountability. Many survivors interpret a narcissist's silence, apparent happiness, or emotional indifference as proof that the relationship never mattered. After everything they endured, seeing the other person move on so quickly can feel deeply invalidating. It is natural to wonder whether they ever think about what happened or whether they feel anything at all. However, outward behavior is not always a reliable indicator of someone's internal emotional experience, especially when that person depends heavily on maintaining a carefully controlled image. A narcissistic individual may suppress uncomfortable emotions rather than acknowledge them. Instead of sitting with sadness, shame, or regret, they often distract themselves by seeking admiration, starting a new relationship, immersing themselves in work, or surrounding themselves with people who reinforce their preferred self-image. These behaviors can create the appearance that they have completely forgotten the past, but in many cases, they are avoiding emotions rather than resolving them. This does not necessarily mean they experience empathy or remorse in the way you might hope. They may miss the attention, validation, or sense of control the relationship provided more than they miss the emotional connection itself. At times, reminders such as seeing your success, hearing your name, or realizing they no longer have influence over you may trigger feelings of frustration, disappointment, or even shame. In the end, one of the greatest misunderstandings about narcissistic behavior is believing that their refusal to admit the truth means they have no inner conflict. Whether they secretly carry shame or spend their lives avoiding it, one fact remains unchanged. Their inability to take responsibility is about their psychological defenses, not your worth. You may never receive the apology you deserve, the acknowledgement you hoped for, or the closure you imagined. But your healing does not have to wait for their confession. Every time you choose to trust your own reality instead of their version of events, you take back a piece of yourself. Every boundary you set, every moment of self-respect you reclaim, and every step you take toward peace weakens the hold that relationship once had over your life. The most powerful victory is not proving them wrong or forcing them to admit what they did. It is reaching a place where their denial no longer defines your truth. Their silence no longer controls your emotions, and their opinion no longer determines your value. If this message resonated with you, share it with someone who may still be questioning their own reality. And remember this: your healing begins the moment you stop waiting for validation from the person who refused to protect your heart in the first place.